The Guardian of the City. Chapter 1. The Silicon Valley Grind. At 1:30 in the morning, the dense fog of the San Francisco Bay Area had completely swallowed the city skyline. But on the 14th floor of a sleek Soma District high-rise, a cluster of fluorescent lights still burned with an unforgiving intensity. Michael Chen stared blankly at his dual monitors, his eyes burning from hours of uninterrupted screen time. His half-empty cup of artesian cold brew had long since lost its appeal, leaving a bitter, chalky film on his tongue. As a senior software engineer at a rapidly scaling fintech startup, Michael was intimately familiar with these late nights. The third iteration of the core API documentation was severely behind schedule, and tomorrow's 10 a.m. code review hung over his head like the sword of Damocles. He pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling a long, ragged breath, and tapped his phone screen to check the time. A mere 5% battery remained. His lock screen briefly illuminated the dimly lit cubicle, a photo of a stoic, bronze statue of Archangel Michael subduing a dragon, a picture he had taken years ago during a quiet moment at a historic mission church. It was a small reminder of order and justice in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. The truth was, Michael's reality was far from the glamorous tech bro stereotype. He was drowning. He still owed over $100,000 in student loans, and his share of the rent for a cramped, damp apartment in Oakland was bleeding him dry at $3,000 a month. The woman he had been seeing, a marketing executive he met on a dating app, had broken things off 3 months prior. "You're just never present, Michael," she had said over a rushed Tuesday night dinner. "Even when you're here, you're looking at a server log in your head." And then there was his mother. She lived alone in rural Ohio, in the same fading vinyl-sided house where Michael had grown up. She was relatively healthy for a woman approaching 70, but the arthritis in her hands was worsening. Every Sunday phone call ended with the same gentle yet heartbreaking refrain. "When are you going to settle down, Mikey? When are you coming home?" By 2:10 a.m., Michael finally committed his code to the repository and snapped his laptop shut. The sheer exhaustion settling into his bones made his limbs feel like lead. Down in the lobby, the overnight security guard offered a sympathetic nod. "Burning the midnight oil again, Mr. Chen?" "Something like that," Michael muttered, offering a weak smile. Outside, the San Francisco air was biting. He unlocked a shared electric scooter on the corner, his only viable option for getting to the BART station at this godforsaken hour. The streets of Soma were eerily quiet, save for the occasional autonomous testing vehicle gliding silently through the intersections, and the exhausted delivery riders wearing brightly colored jackets weaving through the thick fog. By the time he crossed the bay and trudged up the stairs to his shared apartment in Oakland, it was nearing 3 in the morning. The hallway light fixture outside his door had been burned out for 2 weeks. His landlord, an absentee corporate entity, had ignored his maintenance requests. Michael used his phone's flashlight to guide his key into the deadbolt. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of stale pizza and damp carpet. From behind his roommate's door came the muffled sounds of a late-night Twitch stream and the rhythmic clicking of a gaming mouse, the inescapable soundtrack of high-density roommate living. Michael's own bedroom was barely 100 square feet, just large enough to fit a full-size mattress, a cheap particle board desk, and his compounding anxieties. After a scalding 5-minute shower, Michael collapsed onto his bed. He stared at the water stains on the ceiling, illuminated by the amber glow of the street lamp outside his window. The API documentation due tomorrow, the crushing rent, his mother's lonely voice, All these thoughts swirled in his mind like a tangled Gordian knot. Outside, a heavy, rhythmic rain began to beat against the glass. Chapter 2. The Midnight Summons. At 2:40 a.m., the doorbell rang. It was a sharp, jarring sound that cut through the white noise of the rain. Michael flinched. He thought he was hallucinating, a byproduct of sleep deprivation and stress. But 10 seconds later, the bell rang again, followed by 3 firm, authoritative knocks. He threw off his blanket, adrenaline spiking in his chest. Wrapping a hoodie around himself, he crept to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was a middle-aged man impeccably dressed in a dark, bespoke charcoal suit. He held a leather folio under one arm. His posture was rigid, and his expression was deadpan, completely unfazed by the hour or the grimy surroundings of the Oakland apartment complex. Michael cautiously cracked the door open, leaving the chain engaged. "Can I help you? It's 3 a.m. "Mr. Michael Chen?" The man's voice was deep, resonant, and unnervingly calm. "I am from the Human Resources and Placement Division. We have an urgent interview notification for you." Michael frowned, his sleep-addled brain struggling to process the information. "HR? What are you talking about? If this is about the startup, my review isn't until next quarter, and no one does house calls in the middle of the night." "Mr. Chen," the man interrupted, his gaze piercing through the narrow gap in the door. His eyes seemed incredibly ancient, holding a depth that made Michael's breath catch in his throat. "This interview is of the utmost importance. It is for a specialized administrative role. I must insist you come with me." A rational person would have slammed the door, locked the deadbolt, and called the police. Michael wanted to do exactly that. He opened his mouth to tell the man to leave, but inexplicably, an overwhelming sense of calm and compulsion washed over him. His hands moved on their own volition, sliding the chain free and opening the door wide. "Let me get my shoes," Michael heard himself say, his voice sounding hollow and detached.
Waiting at the curb outside the apartment building was a vehicle unlike any Michael had ever seen. It had the sleek, aerodynamic profile of a high-end luxury EV, perhaps a heavily modified Lucid or a custom Tesla. But it was painted a matte, light-absorbing black. The windows were entirely opaque. The man in the suit opened the rear passenger door. Michael hesitated for a fraction of a second before sinking into the plush, charcoal leather interior. The door closed with the heavy, airtight thud of a bank vault. The driver climbed into the driver's seat, and the car pulled away from the curb in absolute silence. Michael wanted to ask questions. Where are we going? Who do you really work for? But the words died in his throat. He watched the rain-slicked streets of Oakland roll by. As they drove, the scenery grew increasingly bizarre. They merged onto the highway, but the familiar neon signs, the towering cranes of the Port of Oakland, and the sprawling urban decay quickly faded into a thick, impenetrable white mist. It was as if they had driven off the edge of the world. The urban sprawl was replaced by vast, silent plains stretching out beneath a starless sky. The driver never spoke, his eyes fixed on the empty road ahead, only occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror. After what felt like hours, or perhaps only minutes, the vehicle slowed. The mist parted, revealing a structure of impossible proportions. It looked like a colossal government building, echoing the neoclassical architecture of the San Francisco City Hall, but magnified to a titanic scale. Massive marble columns reached up into the darkness. At the grand entrance stood several imposing security guards in dark uniforms. Strangely, when Michael tried to focus on their faces, his vision blurred. Their features were indistinct, shifting like smoke in the wind. The lobby beyond the glass doors was bathed in a brilliant, warm light, yet the silence was absolute. "Mr. Chen," the driver said, opening the door and gesturing toward the towering marble steps. "They are waiting for you. Please proceed." Stepping inside, Michael felt the air change. It was crisp, carrying the faint, metallic scent of ozone and old paper. The interior space defied the geometry of the building's exterior. It was a cavernous, echoing amphitheater.
At the far end of the hall sat a raised mahogany platform. Behind a long, curved desk sat approximately 10 figures. They wore dark, formal robes that looked like a blend of modern judicial gowns and ancient academic regalia. Behind them, suspended in the air without any visible support, hung a massive glowing emblem, a depiction of scales perfectly balanced beneath a drawn sword, radiating an aura of absolute authority. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. Why was he here? This was no tech startup. This was no earthly HR department. Below the platform, set perfectly in the center of the polished marble floor, were 2 small wooden desks. Michael was directed to the one on the left. The desk on the right was already occupied by a young man wearing a faded white hoodie and jeans. He looked to be in his mid-20s, his face pale and his eyes wide with the same profound confusion that Michael felt. Resting on Michael's desk were a heavy sheet of thick cream-colored parchment and a premium fountain pen. Michael leaned slightly toward the young man. "Hey," he whispered, his voice echoing too loudly in the vast space. "Do you have any idea what this assessment is about?" The young man swallowed hard, shaking his head. "I don't know, man. I was just driving home in Denver. It was snowing, and then I woke up in that black car." Before Michael could respond, a sudden warm gust of wind swept through the hall. From the high ceiling, 2 perfectly square pieces of paper fluttered down like falling leaves, landing precisely on the center of their respective desks. Printed on the paper in an elegant, modern typeface were 8 words. 1 person, 2 people. With intent, without intent. Michael stared at the prompt. What kind of interview question was this? It wasn't a coding challenge. It wasn't a behavioral matrix. It was a philosophical riddle. He looked up. The 10 judges on the platform were watching them. Their gazes were heavy, scrutinizing, peering straight through his skin and into the deepest recesses of his mind,
Michael picked up the heavy fountain pen, its cool metal grounding him. He looked at the words again. With intent, without intent.
His mind drifted back to his life in Silicon Valley. He thought about the culture of performative work. He remembered a specific night 3 months ago when he had intentionally stayed at the office until midnight, making sure to send a flurry of Slack messages to the engineering directors, just to prove he was grinding. He had built a dashboard feature that he knew the clients didn't actually need, purely to pad his quarterly review. He had been praised for it in the all-hands meeting, but deep down he felt hollow. The praise was unearned. His motive was entirely selfish. Intentional good deeds deserve no reward, Michael thought. If you do something good solely to reap the benefits, the action loses its virtue. The motive is corrupted by self-interest. A figure on the far end of the platform raised a hand. Immediately, the parchments on their desks vanished, reappearing instantaneously on the judge's curved desk. The 10 figures leaned in, murmuring in a language Michael couldn't comprehend. As they read, they nodded in unison, their expressions shifting from stern scrutiny to quiet approval. Chapter 4: The Appointment. Michael Chen, you are hired. The voice boomed through the hall, originating from the center figure on the platform, a man with striking silver hair and an aura of absolute command. Michael stood up, his legs trembling slightly. I'm sorry, what? Hired for what exactly? The silver-haired man smiled, a surprisingly warm and human gesture. The Midwestern jurisdiction is currently in need of a guardian. The state of Ohio specifically requires an administrator of moral architecture. We have observed you for a long time in the Bay Area, Michael. Beneath the stress and the cynical corporate culture you inhabit, you possess a fundamentally kind heart and an upright character. Your essay proves you deeply understand the essence of true justice. Michael's mind reeled. Administrator of moral architecture, guardian of Ohio? I don't understand, Michael stammered, stepping back.
I'm a back-end software engineer. I just write APIs and manage cloud servers. I've never even been a product manager. How am I supposed to govern the moral fate of an entire state? A judge to the left, a woman with kind eyes, leaned forward. A guardian of the city does not require technical skills, Mr. Chen. We do not deal in code. We deal in the ledger of human souls. You only need a fair and uncorrupted heart. Intentional good deeds deserve no reward. Unintentional wrongs deserve no punishment. Because you intuitively grasp this universal truth, you are perfectly suited for the position. Suddenly, the fog in Michael's mind completely evaporated, replaced by a terrifying, awe-inspiring clarity. He wasn't in a dream. He wasn't hallucinating. He had crossed a threshold into something eternal, and they were asking him to stay. A wave of panic washed over him, followed immediately by a profound sorrow. Tears pricked the corners of his eyes. "I am incredibly honored," Michael said, his voice cracking. "But I cannot accept this position. Not yet." The hall fell deadly silent. The judges leaned back, observing him.
"My mother," Michael pleaded, looking up at the central figure. "She is 70 years old. She lives entirely alone in rural Ohio. I am her only child. If I take this position, if I stay here, she will have no one. She will die alone in that house, waiting for me to come home. Please, I beg of you, allow me to return to her. Let me care for her until she reaches the end of her natural life. Once she is at peace, I swear I will return and gladly accept this appointment." The silver-haired man's expression softened. He turned to an elderly figure at the far end of the bench, who was consulting a massive leather-bound ledger that seemed to materialize out of thin air. "Check the lifespan of Eleanor Chen," the silver-haired man commanded. The elderly man ran a glowing finger down the heavy pages. He stopped, tracing a line of invisible ink. "She has exactly 9 years remaining." Above the judges, the glowing emblem of the scales seemed to hum with resonant energy. The silver-haired man looked back at Michael. "Filial piety and profound love are the very traits that make you worthy of this hall," the man said. "We grant you a leave of absence for 9 years. You will return to the mortal realm, care for your mother, live your life. When the time is right, we will call upon you again." He then gestured to the young man in the white hoodie. "Mr. David Miller, you shall serve as the interim guardian of Ohio for the next 9 years. When Mr. Chen returns, you will be reassigned." David stood up, looking overwhelmed but resolute. He walked over to Michael and extended his hand. His grip was firm and unusually warm. "It's an honor to meet you, Mike," David said softly. "I'm from Denver. I guess we're colleagues now. I wrote a poem while we were waiting. I want you to have it." David leaned in and whispered 2 lines that seemed to engrave themselves directly onto Michael's soul. "Spring blooms eternal where the spirit drinks. No candles needed when the soul is bright." Michael repeated the words under his breath. When he looked up to thank David, the grand hall, the judges, and the glowing scales dissolved into a blinding, sterile white light. Chapter 5. The Awakening. "Michael, oh my God, Michael." The blinding white light morphed into the harsh fluorescent panels of a hospital ceiling. The scent of ozone was replaced by the sharp clinical smell of antiseptic and rubbing alcohol. A rhythmic, high-pitched beeping assaulted his ears. Michael blinked, struggling to focus his eyes. He tried to move his arm, but it was heavy, weighed down by IV lines. "He's awake! Doctor, get in here, please." Michael turned his head slowly. Sitting beside his bed, clutching his hand with a desperate, white-knuckled grip, was Sarah, his ex-girlfriend. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her face was streaked with exhausted tears. "Sarah?" Michael croaked, his throat feeling like sandpaper. What are you doing here? What happened?" Sarah let out a sob that was half laugh, half cry, pressing his hand to her cheek. "You've been unconscious for 3 days, Michael. Your roommate found you collapsed on the floor of your apartment. The doctors, they said you had severe viral myocarditis brought on by extreme stress and exhaustion. When the paramedics brought you into UCSF, your heart stopped 3 times. They had to use the defibrillator." Michael stared at the ceiling as the memories flooded back. The 2:40 a.m. knock, the charcoal suit, the black Tesla, the grand hall, the exam. 1 person, 2 people. It felt so real, he whispered to himself. "What did?" Sarah asked gently, brushing a damp lock of hair from his forehead. "David Miller," Michael murmured, "from Denver." Sarah looked confused. "Who? The doctor said you were having fever dreams. You were muttering about coding and ledgers." Michael shook his head slowly. "Nothing, just a dream." But as he recovered in the hospital over the next 2 weeks, Michael couldn't shake the vividness of the experience. The words of the poem echoed in his mind. "No candles needed when the soul is bright." One afternoon, sitting in his hospital bed with his laptop, Michael pulled up a national obituary database. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, before typing in the name David Miller and the location, Denver, Colorado. His blood ran cold. There it was, a local news report from the Denver Post. David Miller, 26, tragically passed away late Tuesday night after his vehicle slid off an icy road into a ravine. Cause of death was ruled as sudden cardiac arrest prior to the crash. The time of death listed in the coroner's report matched exactly with the moment Michael's heart had stopped on his bedroom floor in Oakland. Michael closed the laptop. He stared out the hospital window at the San Francisco fog rolling over the hills, realizing with absolute certainty that his life was no longer his own. It was a borrowed 9 years. Chapter 6. The 9 Years. The 9 years that followed were a quiet, profound metamorphosis. Upon being discharged from the hospital, Michael did something that shocked his startup colleagues. He walked into the CEO's office and handed in his resignation. He didn't ask for severance. He didn't care about his unvested stock options. The Silicon Valley rat race, the performative late nights, the endless pursuit of unicorn status had lost all meaning to him. He packed his meager belongings into a rented U-Haul and drove across the country, back to the rolling green fields of rural Ohio. He found a low-stress, fully remote job maintaining legacy databases for a regional bank. It paid a fraction of his Silicon Valley salary, but it was exactly enough. He moved his mother out of her decaying house and bought a modest, single-story home in a quiet suburb of Columbus, where she didn't have to navigate stairs and where she had a small garden to tend. Every single day, he made her breakfast. Every evening, they sat on the porch together. He watched her smile return, vibrant and full of life. Sarah, who had realized how much she still loved him during his near-death experience, eventually moved to Ohio to be with him. They were married in a small, intimate ceremony under a sprawling oak tree. 2 years later, they had a daughter. Michael was fiercely present. He never checked his phone during dinner. His mind never wandered to server logs. The interview had fundamentally rewired his soul. He lived every day guided by the principle he had written in that grand hall. He performed acts of kindness quietly, anonymously, refusing praise. When others made mistakes, he was the first to offer forgiveness. He became a pillar of his small community, radiating a quiet, grounded warmth. Exactly 9 years and 1 month after his heart attack, on a bitterly cold Tuesday in January, his mother passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 80 years old. Michael held her hand as she took her final breath. He didn't weep violently. He felt a profound, bittersweet completion. He had fulfilled his promise.
6 months after the funeral, hoping to lift the lingering sorrow, Michael took Sarah and their 7-year-old daughter on a long-delayed vacation to Maui, Hawaii. The island was a paradise of vibrant greens and deep ocean blues. On their 4th day, while waiting at the hotel lobby to head out for a luau, Michael was struck by an overwhelming, heavy wave of lethargy. It wasn't painful, just an incredibly deep, bone-weary fatigue, as if gravity had suddenly doubled. "Honey, are you okay?" Sarah asked, noticing him leaning heavily against a marble pillar. Michael smiled at her, a look of profound tenderness in his eyes. "I'm perfectly fine, Sarah. I just feel very tired all of a sudden. I think I'm going to head up to the room and rest. Do you want me to come with you?" No. Take Lily to the luau. Enjoy the evening. I'll see you when you get back." That night, in the quiet solitude of the resort bathroom, Michael stood under the rainfall showerhead. The warm water cascaded over his shoulders, washing away the physical fatigue. He felt an unprecedented sense of peace. The air in the bathroom seemed to carry the faint, familiar scent of ozone and old paper. He turned off the water and wrapped a towel around his waist. He walked out into the bedroom. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:40 a.m. Sarah and Lily had returned and were fast asleep in the massive king-sized bed. Michael stood at the foot of the bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of their chests. He smiled, his heart swelling with an indescribable love. Then he heard it. A sound, distant yet incredibly close. The silent idling of a vehicle. The opening of a heavy door. They were calling him. Michael walked to his side of the bed, lay down, pulled the covers over his chest, and closed his eyes. Chapter 7. The Final Departure. 3 days later, back in the quiet suburbs of Ohio, Sarah's father was sitting on his front porch, nursing a cup of morning coffee. He lived just a few miles from the home Michael and Sarah shared. The old man happened to look up down the tree-lined street, and he blinked, rubbing his eyes, convinced he was experiencing a hallucination. Walking down the center of the suburban street was a majestic, pitch-black horse, and riding the horse, dressed in a sharp, immaculate dark suit, was Michael. Behind him followed a long, silent, ethereal procession of figures dressed in dark, formal robes, walking in perfect unison.
"Mikey," the old man called out, standing up so fast he spilled his coffee. Michael turned his head. He looked younger, vibrant, his posture straight and commanding. He caught his father-in-law's eye, offered a warm, reassuring smile, and gave a slight, respectful nod of greeting. Before the old man could stumble down the porch steps to chase after them, a light morning mist rolled across the street. When the mist cleared a second later, the horse, the procession, and Michael were completely gone. The street was empty, save for the morning birds. Trembling, the old man rushed inside and dialed his daughter's cell phone in Hawaii. Sarah answered on the second ring. Her voice was thick with grief, but remarkably calm. "Dad," she said softly, "I was just about to call you. It's Michael. He's gone." "What?" the old man gasped, clutching the kitchen counter. "What happened? An accident?" "No," Sarah replied, looking at the peaceful expression on her husband's face in the hotel bed. "The doctors here say his heart just stopped. But it wasn't violent. He looks like he just fell into a deep, beautiful sleep." He left peacefully. The old man hung up the phone and walked back out to the porch, staring at the empty spot on the street where he had seen his son-in-law riding away. He remembered the look in Michael's eyes.
It was the look of a man who had seen through the veil of the world and had finally accepted a great, noble responsibility. In the years that followed, friends and colleagues in Ohio often spoke of Michael Chen. They said he was a man who lived so purely, with such quiet grace, that he must have attained some sort of spiritual enlightenment. But only Michael himself knew the truth. He hadn't achieved enlightenment through years of meditation. He had simply gone to take a midnight interview, and he had finally returned to clock in for a job he had accepted 9 years ago. A job governed by a single, unbreakable law. Intentional good deeds deserve no reward. Unintentional wrongs deserve no punishment.